I got volunteered to put some things together about my mom. And what I wanted to do was, I think most of you guys remember the second half of her life. And I want to share a little bit about the first half of her life and some of the things that were kind of special. We've been doing some videoing of some of these things. And I have some personal um, recollections with certain folks that aren't with us anymore, and I'd like to share them, and then it'll kind of give you guys an idea of some of the opportunities you have out there to either share something nice about my mom, or you can roast her just a little bit too if you like, if there's for that opportunity. So I am going to share some nice things, some just basic historic things, and maybe a roast or two. So I would like to start in the 1930s. And my mom was born October 30th, 1934, to Ruby and Ralph Long in Emporia, Kansas. Now, to put this in context, Ralph at the time was 21 and Ruby was 16 years old when they were born, when my mom was born. So, after I was at a family gathering, and I think it was in Westminster with Aunt Sharon and Uncle Bob. And um, my Uncle Bob had the realization that mom was born exactly 9 months after they were married, which led my Uncle Bob and his sharp sense of humor to say, "Well, Dad, you got that one just under the wire." And then when you think about the time in the 1930s, we were just talking about it here, we're talking 90 years ago. So my mom began showing her athletic ability preschool age by swinging on the icebox, not the refrigerator door, but the icebox door, until she pulled the icebox over on her. Didn't have any ice in it at that time. Her father built her favorite present. It was a wooden sled. We're talking about the Depression now, and we didn't have money. There My grandfather struggled with work. He stopped his education at the eighth grade. But her favorite Christmas present was a wooden sled. I've heard this story many, many times when we're doing this. And she remembers her father pulling her up the hill, then climbing on the sled with her, and they would go down the hill. And now we're in Emporia, Kansas, so the hill was really a train embankment that they were going up and down. Um, in the 1940s, like the war years, we're coming out of the Depression. People don't have a lot of things. There's my grandfather struggled finding steady work all the time. It was tough times. They were lived in poverty. But in 1940, April 11th, she became a big sister to my Uncle Gary. And Uncle Gary was born in Junction City, Kansas, in the middle of a snowstorm. And my grandmother wanted her mother there, and she lived in Allen, Kansas, which was 18 miles away. Now, any of you who have talked with my grandfather, and there's a few of you out there that have spent a lot of time with my grandfather, will know and remember the story that for that 18 miles there and the 18 miles back, my grandfather's car, he had to hand do his own windshield wipers. And I bet I heard that story 100 times from him about how he had to hand do his windshield wipers as they went. In early 1941, my grandfather had a friend in California who said, "Ralph, I can get you a job out here. Come out here at this candy company." And so my grandfather left and went to California and got this job in this candy company. My grandmother and my mom and my newly born uncle stayed in Kansas while he got things established. Did I get that right? You looked at me like, okay, after Uncle Gary. Okay. So, so they traveled by train to the Golden State. My grandfather had $50 he had gotten from his grandfather Cook's estate, and to pay for that trip for them to go out there. My mom shared this story, and oftentimes with my brother and I, that on the trip out there, my grandmother was really taking care of my Uncle Gary, and my mom was kind of entertaining herself. And a serviceman sat down next to her on the train, and they played cat's cradle with string for hours. For a couple of days on this trip. Now, my mom tried to teach my brother and I this, and we weren't nearly as interested in it, but we gave it a try. Um, During the war, you're coming out of the depression. We don't have much. You go into the war situation where things are starting to be rationed now, and it's kind of like our toilet paper shortages, just on a larger scale. Everything was there. Gas was rationed. Factories were building that built cars were building planes. And when my uncle Bob was born in 1943, um, you guys didn't even have a car then, did you? So for this early part of the 40s, my mom's family did not have a car. That's how they were living. They would use street cars or walk or buses and things like that. Away. And that's how we went to get the groceries. We all had to go together because that was the way, both Gary, because Bob wasn't born at the time. I don't remember after Bob was born. I think we got a car right away. But anyway, yeah. Both I had to walk, but Gary got to ride. Initially, they moved to the central Los Angeles area, and eventually, the family moved into a two-bedroom bungalow in Compton, California. So I thought about it, and it's like my mom is straight out of Compton, just like in the movie. Um, More of you got that than I thought. Mom, you didn't get that, did you? No, I know. It's okay. I'll explain to you later. Um, so in this two-bedroom bungalow, I have seen photos of it. It, it, it it's a standard California two-bedroom bungalow. Um, but as my mom got into high school with two bedrooms, she got to share that with two brothers. So her high school time was spent with two brothers in the same room with her. My Uncle Gary was always fond of teasing her about how it wasn't until after she left home that my grandparents moved to Linwood and they got a three-bedroom home. And yeah, she could have her own room, but it wasn't until after she left. So, and Uncle Gary reminded her that almost every time we saw them. Um, my mom bounced around from school to school as my grandfather moved a lot, but she finally settled down about the fourth or fifth grade. Was it? Fifth grade was my first time to do a whole year. Yeah, to spend a whole time in one school. So think about that. You're moving from multiple schools every year up until the fifth grade. So, um, but at Francis Willard School in Compton. In the late 40s, early 50s, my mom was a student who won countless perfect attendance awards. Try to be a son with a mom who's constantly reminding you when you're trying to get out of school about those perfect school days. Thank goodness there were still measles and mumps around so you could prove that you were sick, so you didn't have to go to school. Um, in high school, she truly became a Californian. Her boyfriend was a surfer. If you can imagine my mom hanging out with a surfer dude. Um, she was an outstanding athlete in high school at a time where girls' sports was an intramural afterthought, nothing like it is today. She excelled in bowling, softball, volleyball, and basketball. She was also the president of the Girls Athletic Association at Linwood High. Today, Linwood High has one of the top basketball teams in the high school basketball teams in the country and is often ranked number one in the nation. She became a follower of Christ in 1952 through the Thatcher Ministries. You'll have to ask her about Phil Thatcher. He was kind of thuggish, so it was all around that Compton area, so it all works out together. But yeah, he was an inmate and a lot of other things. Also in 1952, She graduated from Linwood High. She went to work at Bell Motors, or American Motors. U.S. Motors. I knew it was. I knew it was something close to that. U.S. Motors. It was at U.S. Motors she met her best friend, her lifelong best friend, Yvonne Schoenberger. At the time, it was Yvonne Rasmussen. They got married real close to the same time, but they have shared their lives together ever since. They're on the phone every week. You know, they used to talk about the boys, the fiancés, the kids, the homes. Now they share recipes for one with each other. So, while at what was it again? U.S. Motors, um, she connected an electronic motor salesman with a new company that was needing a lot of new electric motors. That company was building a new park that would become known as Disneyland. For those of you who are under 50, Disneyland has not always been there. It had to be built. Um, so when you see the alligator that opens his mouth at the Jungle Boat cruise, you can say, "I know somebody who did this." So in the early 1950s, were very busy for Norma. Her worldly cousin Rich Davis thought she needed to be introduced to a Marine Corps friend, his Marine Corps friend Nick. Um, so he took Nick up there to meet my mom, who happened to have her ex-boyfriend at the house at the same time. And it was very heated, not between my dad, not between my mom, but between Rich and the ex-boyfriend. You'll have to ask my mom to give you those details. You guys might want to know about that little kind of, yeah, I don't know if you knew that one or not. So um, in 1954, she married Nick. And I see a lot of familiar faces here that were there for their 50th anniversary celebration. So yeah, we celebrated that. Also in the later 50s, my parents bought a new home in Vista, California. And I would like you to know, if my mom still lived in that home, she would be living in a home about a third the size of the one she lives now, but worth three times as much. So during the early and mid 60s, and I think it's from the time like I was like 4 to 12, the whole time period, my dad was gone half the time. He had two 13-month deployments in Okinawa. He had 6 months of school or so back in the East Coast. And then there was this little missile crisis thing that came up in Cuba when the Russians decided they were going to put missiles in Cuba. My father called my mother with a list of what he needed and let her know that I'm shipping off in 2 hours, so you got to hurry up and get it here. Um, those of you who remember my father knew he wasn't much on long goodbyes anyway. He was always impatient. Um, but the Marine Corps didn't even allow him to say goodbye to his boys before he shipped out for the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was that urgent that things were going on. So this is going to be the hardest one for me to talk about. So she played role of mom and dad for most of that time, having to make those tough decisions, work and raise two young boys. Thankfully, she was supported by my grandfather, her best friend Yvonne's husband, Bill, and our cousin, Rich, who we always fondly called Uncle Rich. All three of those guys had a ton to do with our upbringing and the man influence in there. There was one area that my mom messed up on in this time period. And my mom had me calling my underwear my panties. So when you're 4 years old, you don't think much about my panties. Well, my grandmother was there, and she heard me say, "I got to get my panties on, Grandma." And Grandma looked at me sternly and squared me away and said, "Bruce, men call those underwear." So my grandmother bailed me out and taught me a very valuable lesson. I bet she had a talk with you afterwards. You just don't remember it. Um, at the conclusion of their first tour, of my father's first tour of Okinawa, he returned in time to celebrate the Marine Corps birthday with my mom and Bob Barker on Truth or Consequences. And they happened to be the stars of the show that day. So That was really fun. Those of you who think of Bob Barker's Price is Right, this was the show before The Price is Right that he did. She helped her parents move back to Missouri in the early 60s, which provided adventures both traveling there and traveling home. The now California girl got a chance to drive in her first blizzard on Route 66 to Flagstaff, Arizona. She kept the car on the road, but what a ride. Mom set a good example for her boys on the trip that time, but it was when we were coming back. We dropped um, my grandparents off in Missouri. We hopped on a bus. We came over to see my grandmother here that was just outside of Nickerson. So we got this really fun bus trip. It was a fun adventure for a 6-year-old boy. I don't know how it was for my mom, but my brother ended up with the measles while he was at my grandmother's. So oh, so it's your guys' fault. Oh, oh. Yeah, don't you be ducking back there, Debbie. Um, yeah, so he got through the measles. We got on the train, and we were going along just fine. And around Albuquerque, New Mexico, we were sitting in a dining car, and I don't know how it is now, but those days there was the three of us, so they put a single person at our table with us. As soon as my fried chicken hit the table, I immediately barfed, and my mom didn't say a thing about why he was sick because I think my mom was afraid that if she would have said, "Oh, he must be getting the measles too," they would have dropped us off in Albuquerque for another week. So she didn't lie, but she didn't tell everything that was going on. Some of you might remember my parents used to tour the country by motorcycle. My dad got a motorcycle. He thought, well, let's go just drive around. So they toured all over the country on this motorcycle. I want you to know the two-wheel travel started back in the 60s. My Uncle Bob had finished his stint in the Marine Corps, and my grandparents had also moved back to California. Uncle Bob was living with my grandparents in Compton again. Um, but my uncle, with his extra money, picked up a mini bike. And he took my brother for rides on those Compton streets on that mini bike. And the neighbors didn't think much about it. But when my mom came around the corner with her sweater flying out on that 12-inch seat with her and my uncle on it together, they all had a pretty good laugh about it. My mom continued to bowl. My mom was athletic. She was out in the street playing baseball and stuff with her boys. Um, but one of the other things is money was tight for us with two family, like my dad living in Okinawa, us living here, and money was tight. And she was very resourceful. She would be the league secretary and get paid for that, I believe. And then there was this thing called pin money. Now, pin money is kind of like gambling. Everybody puts money into it. Yeah, she's like, nah, it's not gambling, but it is like gambling because everybody puts money into a pot, and then the people with the highest score or the highest average or the teams that win end up with that money. So maybe it is that you're earning that money. It's not gambling that money, but everybody has to play for it. So, but if I remember right, one year it was so tight. I remember her saying that she had to purchase my birthday gifts with her pin money and S&H green stamps. Yeah. Does anybody remember S&H green stamps? And Sharon does. She's probably the only. Yeah, Deb does. S&H green stamps used to go to the. Yeah, Steve does. You dial them up, and then you get a green stamps with so much you bought for gasoline or other things. So it's kind of like frequent flyer miles today. Yeah. I would like to share something. If Jeff ever ends up with lung cancer, it is because of the haze of the smoke he inhaled while she was bowling, because there was smoking in the bowling alleys. She and my dad enjoyed a variety of activities in San Diego. If you get a chance sometime, one of their favorite things was going to the Old Globe Theater down in Balboa Park, which is right in the flight path of Lindbergh Field. So planes are coming in and going out, and she will tell you how the actors dealt with the noise of a plane shutting down or excelling through the flight path there with those actors trying to do that. She got to enjoy her boys beating up their bodies playing football and baseball, coming home scraped up and bruised from their latest dirt bike mishap. We drove her car when our trucks broke down. She never knew until later how Jeff, where'd he go? Until Jeff, there he is. Until Jeff bent the axle on her Datsun 610, doing something he probably shouldn't have been doing.
It was muddy and it was fun.
She enjoyed the rowdiness of her boys and was also a good friend to their friends. Thankfully, she never had to bail anyone out of jail for some of the pranks they pulled or smuggling M80s and switchblades back from Tijuana.
Slower? What?
My father decided to move back to Kansas in 1977. I'm not sure if she was thrilled with the idea. You will need to ask her at another time about what her feelings were about leaving California and everything out there that she knew. But in that process, she showed she was a shrewd businesswoman. When selling the house on her own, because my father had already come back here to start working, um, my parents waited so I could finish that semester of school. And so it was just she and I living out there. There was a real estate boom going on, and houses were going up $1,000 a month. My mom kept telling my dad, I'm going to wait another month. I'm going to wait another month. He was in a hurry to get that house sold, and mom was working the market. She was getting that price up and up every month, another $1,000. You know, I could have probably gone to master, work on my master's degree, and we'd still be trying to sell it. By the way, that house was bigger than the one in Vista, but if she would have stayed in that house, um, she would be a millionaire now, I believe. Last time I looked, the price. Uh, but she wouldn't have had a view of a lake. She would have had a view of a strip mall. So things we trade for. Um, we drove separate cars coming back to Kansas. It was the time of CB radios. She and I could stay in contact with each other so we didn't get lost. But I got to hear all the truck drivers flirting with a lady who was my mom, driving by herself going down the road. And well, I was surprised. Um, Not that she encouraged it, but truck drivers on the road, guys, out. Yeah. So that brings us full circle back to Kansas for the second half of her 90 years.
Share a memory or a wish, whatever, for mom.
Okay. I met Norma, she was my aunt and my sister, right after Bob and I got here. And I'll tell you, I was welcomed into the family just like that. She has been a friend, not just a sister-in-law, but a true friend to me. And I remember we got married in August. And then I believe it was that Christmas, before Christmas, she invited me down to Vista, and she taught me how to make all kinds of candy. And I don't know if you remember this now, but it was just, for someone to do that, it's just really special to me. She's been special to me all my married life, and I love you, and there's just not another one. It's just not another one. And I have a lot of other sweet memories.
What I wanted to do was share something that I read. There's a quote that says, "The family that has an old person has a living treasure of gold." That's a Chinese proverb. And I was hesitant to call you old because I know all of us, none of us want to think of being older, but the Bible says, "So with old age is wisdom, and with the length of days, understanding." And Ralph Waldo Emerson must have been on the same wavelength because he said, "The years teach much, which the days never knew." And I wanted to tell you how much I've always appreciated you, and we kind of had a special week because my middle name is, I'm named after you. But, but I wanted to thank you for making my wedding cake. That's been a long time now, that's 44 years ago. But I wanted to thank you for doing that for me. And I wanted to thank you for, teaching me how to appreciate the past and our roots, where we come from, and that's the thing that pulls us together, and the stories that we have in our past. And thanks for giving me the love for that and the interest in it. And hopefully there'll be more of us that'll carry on that and the importance of it. And I just wanted you to know that I love you very much.
So, for those of you that don't know the relationship, my dad is who the boys call Uncle Rich. And we lived together in Vista for about 5 years when we lived there and they were there. And one of my very early memories, and I hope Char has this too, Charlene's my sister, was Aunt Norma had a little picnic table in the kitchen that was just child size. And it was always a treat to go to Aunt Norma's and sit at the picnic table because she gave us bologna sandwiches and Fritos. And we did not get Fritos at home. So that was an early memory. Another early memory is my dad was pretty hungry. And he thought it was great fun to have the boys have bean races on the carpet in our living room. And they both went home with skin noses because they were, and I think Aunt Norma put a stop to that because the skin noses were not going over well at home. And recently, the better memories, because I got to come to Hutch in '77, and I have said forever that Aunt Norma is like my second mom. We lost our mom in 2001, and she has just been my best friend and my mom ever since. She and I have tromped through a lot of cemeteries and courthouses, and we had a lot of fun. And I just feel so blessed. I just feel so blessed. You are truly wonderful. And you have been such a spiritual mentor to me. And I just appreciate you so much. I'm gonna cry.
So, Deb stole my thunder and, told the story, but that's okay, that's what makes us a report. But, the Fritos were great, and the bean races were hilarious. But that time in Vista, being the youngest in the family, wasn't always the greatest when you had two sisters who loved the torment. So it was nice to be able to go over to Aunt Norma's and not be tormented, but it was fun just to kind of hang out with the boys. And I was probably maybe 4 years old before I realized that they weren't my brothers, which I look back on now and think, if I had ever had any brothers, they were the guys that I would have wanted for my brothers. So, and I know the reason that was is because Aunt Norma raised two really good guys, and she just always put family first. And I've never not seen her do that in all the time that I've been around her. And I was so thankful. It was a coincidence that we moved back here. Actually, her and Bruce ended up coming back to Hutchinson about the same weekend that I did. And I didn't realize at the time that was what was going to happen, but I was so thankful that she was here. Because she was always kind of one of those people that I knew no matter what kind of stupid things that I did. And as a teenager, and I had some of that crazy, really blood in me, along with the Davis blood, it made me do stupid things, but I knew that no matter what stupid things, Aunt Norma would always be there to just love on you when you did those stupid things. So I really appreciated that. She was my godsend when I was going through tough times here when I first lived here, the first time in Hutchinson, and when I came back. and that Norma was here. I'm just like Deb said, she's like a second mom. And when our mom passed away, she was only 66, 67 years old. So it was great to be back around my mom again, you know, and she really is my mom. She has taught me more about being faithful than anybody I know. And I just know that God only gives you so many blessings in your lifetime, and she's the greatest blessing He ever gave me, in just being able to go on faith.
Just real quick, you know, Shar kind of hit on there that mom was there through dumb things and tough things and all the rest. You know, one thing I would have to say about my mom is her commitment to everything, everyone that was around her, everything. I'll never forget, we were trying to get the race car ready one night, and there's Mom in the garage at the house. We've got the race car in there. She's got a grinder. She's got the set of goggles on, and she is absolutely covered in dust. She's getting the grinding down so we get the paint on the car. And, you know, so she was right in there, just along with everybody else. And she was always that way, supporting of us. You know, whether it was scouting, she was the din mom, PTA, whatever it is, Mom always was there. But she was committed to other people as well. And I can remember, you know, somebody may mention here, probably Bruce earlier, about her cake decorating business. And in Vista, she had quite a cake decorating business. That cake that we had here probably would have been $5 back then. Today, it was a whole lot more than that. And as beautiful as that cake is, Mom did incredible stuff. One of her most famous cakes was the old gray mayor cake. It was a 3D of an old gray mayor sitting there with a bucket and all of that.
Maybe that's what we should have done today, was the old gray mayor.
But that was a favorite 40-year-old cake for people and such. And she had quite a business, but I remember she was doing a wedding cake, and it wasn't going well. And if you've not done cake decorating, this was pre-fondant days, and she would take, and she had this big knife, and she would dip it in hot water, and she would move that around the cake, and that would smooth the icing. It would melt it just enough that it would smooth the icing. And she's trying to get this wedding cake done, and she has just boiled water, poured it into the cup, and just as she reached over there to dip the knife into it, that cup exploded. And all of that boiling hot water covered her hand and her right one, and she's right-handed. And I remember seeing that, and immediately she put it under the cold water. And you know, this was back in the day when they said, put butter on a burn. So she puts butter on it, she puts it back. And all I can remember her saying is, he's giving me some gauze, and she wrapped it up. She said, I've got to get this cake out. Now, anybody else would have just stopped right there. I mean, her hand was beet red, up almost to the elbow. But she was committed and dedicated. She didn't even know those people. But she said she would have their wedding cake for them. And she met that deadline, even in that pain and all that was there. And so I guess if you use a word from Mom, long-suffering would be one, because she suffered long between two of us on many things. But anyway, it's like I say, I've always appreciated Mom's commitment. You know, I mean, she's always been there for all of us and such. So.
And I just want to say, I have the absolute warmest memories of coming to Kansas and staying at your house. I don't even know how many times we did, but it seems like fairly often, or maybe the memories are just so good that it seems like it was a lot. Just when I think of coming to your house, I just think of you were such a great host. And I think of you often when I host people in my home now. I just remember you had the most amazing breakfasts when we would wake up, and I'd be downstairs and just smell it. And it just, I don't know, it just made us feel so welcome and loved. And so I try to do that. I think of you now when I have people in my home. I try to make them feel the same way that you made us feel. But I always loved coming to Kansas and seeing you, and the rest of the family. And I always loved looking through your scrapbooks, your amazing scrapbooks, and learning, hearing you talk about our family that, yes, I love you, and just thankful for all the times I got to come see you.
That was pretty special right there, wasn't it? She emulates you as she hosts. So Gary, the second one, was my dad, and somehow we grew up in the Ozark Mountains, which we weren't the Beverly Hillbillies because we never found oil. But growing up, our idea of Los Angeles was that. Concrete ponds, actors, movie stars. And so, to this day, you are one of the most sophisticated women I've ever known. When I just learned a while ago, Bruce said that you guys had trouble financially, I'm like, wow. Because the only clothes that I wore that were decent in my life had Bruce or Jeff's name in the back. All the toys that we got to play with, they were hand-me-downs from Bruce and Jeff. And so I had this, I mean, to hear that you had financial issues is just a revelation, because okay, you said something. You said she was friends to our friends. That doesn't surprise me. But we're from the Ozark Mountains. It's different. It's not that you and mom are different. It's that you had 2 kids, mom had 5. But mom didn't want to know our kids, our friends. It's like, hey, can they come up? You know they can't come in this house. So Aunt Norma, we've always admired you. And this, what Angie said, is exactly right. I don't think I've ever seen you not smiling. And you were also a banker, and that was something that all we knew of bankers is they had cool hours, and they were very wealthy, and they touched money. These things that were just, wow.
You only touched the mic.
Yeah. But we love you, and obviously your family very, very much. And we've always admired you. So now you have our perspective, or at least my perspective, that I've just always had you guys elevated as Californians, as banking people, as giver of clothes and toys. And so,
I wasn't banking before I got here.
oh, is that right? Yeah. Well, we love you and happy birthday.
Since we have so many singers. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Norma.
Mom and Norma.
Happy birthday to you.
Okay, if you have enough air in you, blow out those candles. Mom, do you want to say anything?
Thanks everybody for coming. The food was great.
Yes.
Appreciate everybody. Love everybody. Everybody here I love.